Margaret Thompson adjusted her navy blue uniform one more time. In the employee locker room of Sterling Dynamics, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. At 58, she never imagined she'd be starting a new job as a janitor, but life had a way of humbling even the most prepared people. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she checked her reflection in the small mirror. Attached to her locker door, her graying hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite the circumstances that had brought her here, she was determined to approach this job with dignity and professionalism. "You must be Margaret," said a warm voice behind her. She turned to see a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a genuine smile. "I'm Linda Rodriguez, head of custodial services. Welcome to Sterling Dynamics." "Thank you, Linda. I'm ready to get started," Margaret replied, grateful for the welcoming tone. Sterling Dynamics was one of the most prestigious tech companies on the West Coast, housed in a gleaming 40-story glass tower in downtown Seattle. The company specialized in artificial intelligence and cloud computing solutions, serving Fortune 500 companies worldwide. Margaret had only learned these details during her brief orientation the previous week. "Let me show you around," Linda said, leading Margaret out of the locker room and into the main corridor. Sterling Dynamics is celebrating its 15th anniversary this week, so we're preparing for a major gala event on Friday night. That means extra attention to detail everywhere. As they walked through the building, Margaret was struck by the modern elegance of the offices. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of Puget Sound, and the open concept workspaces were filled with employees working intently at state-of-the-art computers. The walls were decorated with awards and photos chronicling the company's rapid growth from a small startup to a billion-dollar corporation. "Your primary responsibility will be the executive floors," Linda explained as they entered an elevator that required a special key card. 38th through 40th floors. The CEO and senior leadership team work up there, so everything needs to be immaculate. Margaret nodded, making mental notes about the layout and procedures. She had been a high school English teacher for 32 years before budget cuts forced her into early retirement. The pension she received wasn't enough to cover her mortgage and medical bills, especially after her husband Robert's lengthy battle with cancer had depleted their savings before he passed away 6 months ago. "The executive floors are beautiful," Linda continued as the elevator rose. "Mr. Sterling, our CEO, is very particular about cleanliness and organization. He's young for a CEO, only 35, but he built this company from nothing. Brilliant mind, from what I hear." The elevator doors opened to reveal an elegant reception area with marble floors, contemporary artwork, and fresh flower arrangements. Margaret could see why attention to detail was crucial up here. "Now, here's something interesting," Linda said, lowering her voice slightly. "We've got a new security guard starting this week too. His name is Michael, and he'll be working the evening shift during the anniversary celebrations. You might see him around when you're doing your evening cleaning rounds." They spent the next hour touring the executive floors, with Linda explaining the specific requirements for each area. The CEO's office was particularly impressive, a corner suite with panoramic views, a conference table that could seat 12 people, and bookshelves lined with technology journals and business publications. "Mr. Sterling usually stays late," Linda mentioned as they finished the tour. "He's very hands-on with the business. Sometimes I think he never sleeps." As they returned to the main floor, Margaret noticed increased activity throughout the building. Employees were working with obvious excitement, and she could see event planners setting up decorations in the large atrium that would host Friday's anniversary gala. "The gala is going to be quite an event," Linda explained. 300 guests, including major clients, investors, and all our employees. It's Mr. Sterling's way of celebrating everyone who contributed to the company's success." Margaret felt a familiar pang of loneliness as Linda described the celebration. Robert would have been fascinated by a company like Sterling Dynamics. He had worked as an electrical engineer for Boeing before his illness, and he'd always been interested in emerging technologies. "I'll make sure everything is perfect for the event," Margaret assured Linda. "I know you will. Your references from the school district were outstanding." They said you were one of the most dedicated teachers they'd ever had. Margaret appreciated the kind words, though she still felt self-conscious about the dramatic change in her circumstances. She had gone from shaping young minds in a classroom to mopping floors in a corporate building. But work was work, and she needed the income and health insurance that Sterling Dynamics provided. As her first day progressed, Margaret threw herself into her new responsibilities. She cleaned offices with the same meticulous attention she had once given to lesson plans, ensuring that every surface gleamed and every wastebasket was properly emptied. Around 6 p.m., as most of the daytime employees were heading home, Margaret was finishing up the 39th floor when she encountered the new security guard. Linda had mentioned. "Evening," said a young man who appeared to be in his early 30s. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Despite wearing a standard security uniform, there was something about his posture and demeanor that suggested confidence and authority. "You must be Michael," Margaret said, pausing in her work. "I'm Margaret, the new custodial staff for the executive floors." "Nice to meet you, Margaret," he replied with a warm smile. First day," she confirmed, still learning the ropes. "But Linda has been very helpful." Michael nodded. "Linda's great. She's been here since the early days of the company." He glanced around the pristine hallway. "You're doing excellent work. Everything looks spotless." Margaret found herself appreciating his friendly manner. Many people barely acknowledged custodial staff, but Michael spoke to her with genuine respect. "Are you new to security work?" she asked, curious about his background. "In a way," Michael said, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm still getting used to the night shift, but I like being able to observe how the company really operates when most people have gone home." "I imagine you see a lot from that perspective," Margaret agreed. "People probably don't pay much attention to security guards." "Exactly," Michael said, his expression becoming more thoughtful. "You'd be surprised what you can learn about a company and its employees when they think no one important is watching." Something in his tone made Margaret look at him more carefully. There was an intelligence in his eyes that seemed almost out of place in a security guard uniform. "Well, I should get back to work," Margaret said. "The anniversary gala is coming up, and I want to make sure everything is perfect." "The gala should be quite an event," Michael agreed. "I'll be working security that night, so I'll probably see you round." As Margaret continued her cleaning routine, she found herself thinking about the new security guard. There was something about Michael that didn't quite fit her expectations of security personnel. He spoke with the vocabulary and confidence of someone with significant education and experience, and his questions about the company seemed more strategic than what she'd expect from someone primarily concerned with building safety. But then again, Margaret reminded herself, she was probably the last person who should make assumptions about people based on their current job titles 6 months ago. If someone had told her she'd be working as a janitor, she would have found it unthinkable. As she finished her first day at Sterling Dynamics, Margaret felt cautiously optimistic. The work was honest, her colleagues seemed kind, and the company clearly valued excellence. She had always believed that any job worth doing was worth doing well, and she was determined to bring that same philosophy to her new role. Looking out at the Seattle skyline from the 40th floor, Margaret thought about Robert and how proud he would have been of her resilience. She was starting over at 58, but she was still moving forward. What she didn't know was that her chance encounter with the friendly security guard would soon reveal truths about Sterling Dynamics, its leadership, and her own strength that would change her perspective on everything. By Wednesday evening, Margaret had settled into a comfortable routine at Sterling Dynamics. She had mapped out the most efficient cleaning schedule for the executive floors and had begun to notice the unique rhythms of the company's leadership team. The 38th floor housed the senior vice presidents, who typically left by 7 p.m. The 39th floor contained the offices of the C-suite executives, most of whom worked until 8 or 9, and the 40th floor was home to CEO Jonathan Sterling's office and private conference rooms. Margaret had yet to meet Mr. Sterling in person, though she had heard plenty about him from other employees. According to the conversation she overheard while cleaning, he was brilliant but demanding, innovative but sometimes impatient, and completely dedicated to the company he had built from a small apartment in Capitol Hill. 15 years ago, he never asks anyone to work harder than he works himself. She had heard one executive assistant tell another, "The man practically lives in his office." This evening, Margaret was working on the 40th floor when she encountered Michael again. The security guard was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights with an expression of deep concentration. "Beautiful view," Margaret commented as she approached with her cleaning cart. "It really is." Michael agreed. "You can see the whole city from up here. Sometimes I think this perspective helps you understand things you might miss when you're down in the middle of everything." Margaret began dusting the reception area furniture, appreciating the philosophical nature of his observation. "That's very insightful. Are you originally from Seattle, born and raised?" Michael said, "I've watched this city change dramatically. Over the past decade, the tech boom has brought incredible opportunities, but also challenges for longtime residents." As they talked, Margaret noticed several things about Michael that continued to puzzle her. His vocabulary was sophisticated, his knowledge of the city's economic development was detailed, and when he spoke about the tech industry, he used terminology that suggested deep familiarity with business operations. "You seem to know a lot about the technology sector," Margaret observed. Michael paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "I've always been interested in how companies grow and evolve. Sterling Dynamics is a fascinating case study in successful entrepreneurship. Have you been following the company for long?" "You could say that." Michael replied with another enigmatic smile. "I'm particularly interested in how the leadership team makes decisions and how those decisions impact everyone who works here." Margaret was about to ask another question when they were interrupted by the arrival of someone she immediately recognized as a senior executive, based on his expensive suit and confident demeanor. "Oh, excuse me," the executive said, noticing Margaret's cleaning cart. "I didn't realize anyone was still working up here. I'm just finishing up the reception area." Margaret assured him, "I can come back later if you need privacy." "No, that's fine," the executive replied, but his tone suggested he was already dismissing her presence. He then turned to Michael. "I don't think we've met. I'm Richard Blackstone, Chief Financial Officer." "Michael," came the simple reply, with no additional title or explanation. Margaret noticed that Michael didn't offer to shake hands, and his posture became noticeably more formal. Richard seemed to interpret this as appropriate deference from security staff and continued with his business. "I'm here to grab some files for tomorrow's board meeting." Richard explained to no one in particular. "The anniversary gala is generating a lot of investor interest, and we want to make sure our financial projections are solid." As Richard headed toward his office, Margaret observed Michael's reaction. Instead of the neutral expression she would expect from a security guard, Michael's face showed what looked like analytical assessment, as if he were evaluating Richard's words and demeanor for significance. "Is everything all right?" Margaret asked quietly. "Just doing my job," Michael replied, but his eyes continued to follow Richard's movements. Part of security work is observing and noting anything unusual. Did something seem unusual about Mr. Blackstone? Michael considered this question for a moment. "Not unusual, exactly. But in my experience, people often reveal their true priorities in unguarded moments. The way someone talks about financial projections can tell you a lot about their values." Margaret found this perspective remarkably sophisticated for a security guard, but she was beginning to understand that Michael was not a typical anything. 20 minutes later, after Richard had collected his files and left, Michael approached Margaret again. "Margaret, can I ask you something, of course? What made you decide to work at Sterling Dynamics?" The personal nature of the question surprised her, but something about Michael's genuine interest encouraged honesty. "I needed a job with health insurance," she said simply. "I was a high school teacher for 32 years, but budget cuts forced early retirement. My husband passed away recently, and the medical bills, well, I needed to start over." Michael's expression became notably more serious. "I'm sorry for your loss." That must have been incredibly difficult. Thank you. It has been challenging, but I'm grateful for this opportunity. Sterling Dynamics seems like a good company to work for. What do you think makes a company good to work for? Michael asked. Margaret paused in her cleaning to consider the question. I think it's about how they treat all their employees, not just the executives. Whether they recognize that everyone contributes to success, from the CEO down to, she gestured to herself, the custodial staff. That's exactly right, Michael said with surprising conviction. A company's true character is revealed in how it treats its most vulnerable employees. You have strong opinions about corporate culture for a security guard, Margaret observed with a gentle smile. I've had opportunities to observe many different companies, Michael replied, and I've learned that the best leaders are those who understand that their success depends on everyone else's dedication and hard work. As Margaret continued her evening routine, she reflected on her conversations with Michael. There was clearly more to him than met the eye, but she respected his privacy. Everyone had their own story, their own reasons for being where they were. What she didn't know was that Michael's keen interest in employee treatment and corporate culture wasn't academic. It was intensely personal. As the founder and CEO of Sterling Dynamics, Jonathan Sterling had spent the past 3 months working undercover in various positions throughout his own company, trying to understand how his leadership decisions affected the people who made his success possible. The anniversary gala was approaching, and with it, Jonathan's plan to reveal what he had learned during his time observing the company from the bottom up. But first, he wanted to understand more about employees like Margaret, people whose dedication and dignity impressed him every day, and whose stories reminded him why he had started Sterling Dynamics in the first place. Friday evening arrived. With the crisp clarity that made Seattle autumns legendary, the Sterling Dynamics building was transformed for the anniversary gala, with elegant lighting highlighting the glass exterior and red carpet leading from the street to the main entrance. Margaret had spent the entire day ensuring that every surface in the building gleamed, paying special attention to the 40th floor where VIP guests would be taken for private tours. As evening approached, Margaret watched from the 38th floor windows as guests began arriving. Luxury cars dropped off elegantly dressed men and women. While photographers captured the arrivals, she recognized several faces from business, magazines, and local news coverage, investors, technology leaders, and city officials who had helped Sterling Dynamics grow into a regional powerhouse. Quite a turnout, said a familiar voice behind her. Margaret turned to see Michael approaching, dressed in a crisp security uniform with a radio clipped to his shoulder. Even in uniform, there was something about his bearing that suggested authority. Beyond his apparent role, it's impressive, Margaret agreed. Mr. Sterling must be very proud of what he's built here. I'm sure he is, Michael replied, his tone carrying a note she couldn't quite identify. Though I suspect he's more interested in recognizing the people who helped build it than in taking credit himself. Margaret had finished her regular duties early, but Linda had asked her to remain available throughout the evening in case any spills or cleanup issues arose during the event. She had changed into her most professional-looking uniform and was prepared to stay discreetly in the background. Will you be working the entire evening? Margaret asked Michael. Yes, I'll be monitoring the executive floors while the main event happens in the atrium. Sometimes the most important conversations happen away from the crowd. As they spoke, Linda Rodriguez appeared with several other custodial staff members. Margaret, perfect timing. Linda said, we're doing a final walkthrough of the 40th floor before the VIP tours begin. Mr. Sterling specifically requested that everything be perfect up there. I'll come with you. Michael said, I need to do a security check anyway. The group took the elevator to the executive floor, where Margaret felt a surge of pride seeing her work displayed. Every surface sparkled, every piece of furniture was perfectly arranged, and the spectacular city views were unobstructed by even a single smudge on the windows. Outstanding work, everyone, Linda praised. Margaret, the CEO's office looks particularly impressive. As they completed their inspection, Margaret noticed Michael paying close attention to details that seemed beyond typical security concerns. He checked the arrangement of chairs in the conference room, ensured that all the company awards were properly displayed, and even adjusted a few picture frames that were slightly askew. "You're very thorough," Margaret observed when they had a moment alone. "Tonight is important," Michael replied simply. "Everything needs to be perfect." By 8 p.m., the gala was in full swing. Margaret positioned herself in a small break room on the 39th floor, where she could respond quickly to any cleaning emergencies while staying out of the way. Through the glass walls, she could see groups of distinguished guests touring the executive floors, led by senior managers who proudly explained the company's innovations and achievements. Around 9 p.m., Linda's radio crackled with a request. "We need someone to quickly clean the main conference room on 40. A guest spilled wine on the table. I'll handle it," Margaret replied. Gathering her supplies, the 40th floor was bustling with activity as she arrived. A group of about 20 VIP guests were gathered around the conference table, listening to what appeared to be an impromptu presentation. Margaret discreetly entered through the side door and began cleaning the small wine spill, trying to remain invisible. Sterling Dynamics' success, she heard someone saying, has always been built on the principle that innovation comes from treating people with respect and recognizing their contributions. Margaret glanced up briefly and saw a distinguished man in his 60s speaking to the group. She recognized him from photos as chairman of the board, William Harper. "That philosophy comes directly from our CEO," Mr. Harper continued. "Jonathan Sterling has never forgotten that a company is only as strong as the people who believe in its mission." As Margaret finished cleaning and prepared to leave, she noticed Michael standing at the back of the room, observing the presentation with intense focus. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. Margaret returned to her break room, but 20 minutes later, Linda's radio buzzed again. "All custodial staff, please report to the main atrium. Mr. Sterling is about to make his anniversary address, and he specifically requested that all employees be present." Margaret felt a flutter of nervousness. She had never been included in company-wide events at her previous job, and she wasn't sure if this invitation extended to someone who had been working there for less than a week. "That means you too, Margaret," Linda assured her, noting her hesitation. Mr. Sterling was very clear: all employees. The main atrium was packed with guests and employees. Margaret found a spot along the wall where she could see the small stage that had been set up near the main entrance. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as conversations gradually quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen," came a voice over the microphone, "please welcome the founder and CEO of Sterling Dynamics, Jonathan Sterling." Margaret craned her neck to see over the crowd as applause filled the room. A tall figure approached the microphone, and as he moved into the light, Margaret felt her breath catch in her throat. It was Michael. The friendly security guard she had been chatting with all week was standing at the podium, no longer wearing a uniform, but dressed in an elegant navy suit. His posture radiated the confidence and authority she had sensed but couldn't place. And when he began to speak, his voice carried the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to leadership. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Jonathan Sterling began, his voice carrying clearly through the atrium. 15 years ago, Sterling Dynamics started with a simple belief that technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. Margaret stood frozen, her mind racing to process this revelation. Michael, Jonathan Sterling, had been working alongside her all week, asking thoughtful questions about corporate culture and employee treatment, observing how his own company operated from the perspective of its most entry-level workers. "Over the past 3 months," Jonathan continued, "I've had the privilege of working in various positions throughout our company, learning firsthand how our policies and culture affect the people who make our success possible." A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd as employees realized what their CEO was saying. "I've worked in our mailroom, our cafeteria, our IT support department, and most recently, in security and custodial services. I wanted to understand not just what we do, but how we do it, and whether our values are truly reflected in every employee's daily experience." Margaret felt tears gathering in her eyes as she understood the full scope of what had been happening. Every conversation, every observation, every moment of kindness had been genuine, but it had also been part of something much larger. "What I've learned," Jonathan said, his voice growing stronger, "is that Sterling Dynamics is blessed with employees whose dedication, dignity, and humanity far exceed what any CEO has a right to expect. I've met people who bring excellence to every task, who treat their colleagues with respect regardless of their position, and who embody the values that make this company truly special." His eyes scanned the crowd, and Margaret felt certain that for a moment his gaze found hers. "Tonight, we're not just celebrating 15 years of business success. We're celebrating the people who chose to be part of this journey, and we're committing to ensuring that Sterling Dynamics continues to be a place where everyone, regardless of their title or department, is valued, respected, and given opportunities to grow." The applause following Jonathan Sterling's revelation was thunderous, but Margaret barely heard it. Her mind was still processing the fact that the CEO of one of Seattle's most successful companies had spent the week working alongside her, observing her work, and genuinely engaging with her story. As the crowd began to disperse for the remainder of the gala festivities, Margaret found herself uncertain about what to do next. Should she approach Jonathan? She still thought of him as Michael. Or would that be presumptuous? Should she slip away quietly and pretend this extraordinary evening had never happened? Her dilemma was resolved when Linda Rodriguez appeared at her side, beaming with excitement. "Margaret, Mr. Sterling has asked to speak with you personally. He's waiting in the small conference room on the 39th floor." Margaret's heart began racing. "Did I do something wrong?" "Quite the opposite," Linda assured her with a warm smile. "Just be yourself." That's clearly what impressed him in the first place. 5 minutes later, Margaret stood outside the conference room door, smoothing her uniform and trying to calm her nerves. She knocked gently and heard Jonathan's familiar voice calling her to enter. "Margaret," he said, rising from his seat as she entered. He had loosened his tie and removed his suit jacket, making him look more like the Michael she had come to know over the past week. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Please have a seat." Margaret sat down carefully, still struggling to reconcile the friendly security guard with the CEO sitting across from her. "I have to admit, I'm a bit shocked by tonight's revelation." Jonathan smiled, and it was the same warm, genuine expression she remembered from their evening conversations. "I imagine it is quite a surprise. I owe you an explanation, and probably an apology for not being completely honest about who I was." "You don't owe me anything," Margaret replied. "I'm just a custodial worker who's been here less than a week." "That's exactly why I wanted to talk with you," Jonathan said, leaning forward slightly. "Margaret, you are not just anything. In the time I've observed you working, I've seen someone who approaches every task with professionalism, who treats every person with respect, and who embodies the kind of character that makes a company truly successful." Margaret felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I was just doing my job." "No, you were doing much more than that. You were demonstrating excellence, integrity, and kindness. Those aren't job requirements. Those are personal choices that reflect who you are as a person." Jonathan paused, gathering his thoughts. "Margaret, I started Sterling Dynamics because I believed technology could make people's lives better. But somewhere along the way, as the company grew, I began to worry that I was losing touch with the human element. That makes everything else meaningful. Is that why you decided to work undercover?" "Exactly. I needed to understand how our corporate culture actually feels to the people who experience it every day. I wanted to know if our values were just words on a website, or if they were lived realities for our employees." Margaret considered this thoughtfully. "And what did you discover?" Jonathan's expression became more serious. "I discovered that we have incredible people like you who bring dignity and excellence to their work, regardless of recognition. But I also discovered that we haven't always done enough to acknowledge and support that excellence." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Margaret, I'd like to offer you a position in our Human Resources Department, specifically working on employee experience and corporate culture initiatives." Margaret's mouth fell open. "I'm sorry, What? You have 32 years of experience. Understanding people, managing complex situations, and creating positive environments. You've demonstrated exceptional character and insight. We need someone who can help us ensure that every employee feels valued and supported. And I can't think of anyone better qualified than you. Margaret stared at the folder. Unable to speak, the position description outlined a role that would utilize her experience as an educator while allowing her to contribute to corporate policy and employee development. The salary is $65,000 annually, with full benefits including health insurance and a retirement plan. Jonathan continued. You would work directly with Linda Rodriguez and our HR director to develop programs that support all employees, from entry-level positions to senior management. Tears began flowing down Margaret's cheeks as the magnitude of this opportunity sank in. 6 months ago, she had